I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
It is week 2 of our October 2022 theme month, Halloween/horror movies. We're doing a bit of a callback to last year, in which we watched The Exorcist from 1973. We just finished watching the 2005 release, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. And I have a little background about why we chose to watch, or why I chose to select this as one of our movies for this month. So, we both loved The Exorcist. We're really blown away by it when we watched it last year. And so I decided to go through all 5 Exorcist prequel-sequel films in short order in the weeks that followed. This was the only one that I thought was really worth its salt. Exorcist 2 was sequel. Exorcist 3 had some really interesting ideas in it, and it was both written and directed by William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original novel. But it committed a certain sin that I could not forgive. And it's one that constitutes a major spoiler, so I can't really tell you what that sin is, but it made me so angry that I just couldn't like the movie after that.
It was the unforgivable sin?
It was the unforgivable sin. And then Exorcist, the beginning, is absolute garbage. Absolute garbage. And we'll probably get into some of this when we get into the trivia. This movie, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, was made first. It was directed by Paul Schrader, who I absolutely love. I'll follow Schrader anywhere, kind of like I'll follow that extremist lady if you stay tuned for the outtakes. The studio saw it, and they're like, that's not what we want. So they got a more conventional director to direct a more conventional movie, and they reshot like 95% of the movie. They doubled the amount of money they spent on it. And that movie actually, to my disappointment, made a little money.
Yeah.
But it didn't make a ton of money. And so it was decided after its release, let's go ahead and let release Schrader's version make a little bit more money off of this, since we put so much into it. And I'm glad they did. I think it's the one they should have started with. But let's get your thoughts. You've just barely seen it. I'm curious, what did you think of Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist?
I'm still processing it a little bit. There's one thing that's missing from this that we thought, we both talked about when we watched The Exorcist, was an intriguing thing that made us curious about some of this backstory. Mm-hmm. And it's not here.
Okay.
Do you remember what that is?
You'll have to refresh me.
The little figurine that he finds in the excavation.
Yeah, but he finds that figurine many, many years after the events of this film. We see a similar Pazuzu idol in this film. Mm-hmm. This is the beginning of that relationship that Father Merrin and Pazuzu would have over the ensuing decades. This film takes place in the mid-1940s.
But overall, I like this film. There's a few times when the tempo and the pacing is a little slow, but for the most part, it's really consistent and it builds. Mm. Really good job of building. There's a couple times, I guess you could even say it's a little heavy-handed, like some of the... Do we ever get the name of that tribal group?
I forget.
But like when they're dancing and the soldiers are kind of watching over them, that... there were parts as Marin or Francis interchangeably are fleeing from the church or responding back to the church. That felt slightly heavy-handed. But the stuff inside the church, I thought that all was well executed. It takes an interesting path to bring Father Merrin back to his relationship with his faith. Mm-hmm. That was kind of an interesting path.
He's got a good arc.
Yeah. Father Merrin, of course, is played by Stellan Skarsgård, who's a very capable actor. Yeah, it was... I'm impressed by this. I liked it. I'm still processing a couple things from it. But yeah, what were your first impressions the first time you saw it?
Well, the first time I saw it, I had just sat through 3 not very good Exorcist prequels, or Exorcist sequels and prequels. So when I got to this, I probably liked it even more because of what I've just sat through, and be like, this guy gets it. Like Paul Schrader, I think of all of the films subsequent to The Exorcist, this gets it right. Even the Blatty one, Exorcist 3, I don't think he understood his own stuff as well as Schrader did it. And of course, when the studio picked this up, I guess originally it was going to be John Frankenheimer was going to direct it, Manchurian Candidate and The Train and all those classic movies. He was more or less a director for hire, but he was old. And he took himself out of the running. It's like, I can't do this. And then he died a month later.
Wow.
Which pushed back production, and they brought in Schrader, and to their, what shouldn't have been any surprise, what Schrader gave them was a Paul Schrader movie.
Well,
it's a horror movie, but it's really about faith crisis and guilt.
yeah.
It's themes that he's explored many times before, notably in First Reformed and in Hardcore.
I was about to bring up First Reformed, and in particular in that movie, he demonstrates his ability to take a faith narrative and present it in a light that you can choose to take the way you want to take it. You can look at things like First Reformed and look at it as, there's a challenge to faith there, and then at the end, like, he puts it back together such that you can pick which way to go with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he leaves it. Yeah, he lets the audience decide how to interpret what they've seen.
That's one of his strengths, and it shows again here.
Yeah, and he's good. He takes this subject matter seriously, and he treats it respectfully, and he likes to work in really interesting dialogue and really interesting interpersonal relationships between the characters. I don't know how much of this you could really say is scary. And the extent that anything's scary,
is scary, but it's
mostly existentially scary.
Yeah, but it also all occurs primarily in like the last quarter of the movie.
Yeah, well, which ties in well to The Exorcist. As we talked about last year, when people think of The Exorcist, they think of the last half an hour, and I feel like that's what the people at Warner Brothers thought of. And it's like, no, that's not what Schrader's going to give you. For one thing, that's true to the stereotype of The Exorcist. It's not true to the actual movie The Exorcist. And he'll give you something with a similar structure. We should talk a little bit about the plot. The movie begins with a prequel sequence in occupied Holland in 1944. Father Marin is the local priest. There's somebody in the area has been harassing the Nazis who are beginning of the gradual fall. They're losing the war at this point. And this German officer comes to town, rounds up everybody, says, I know some of you guys are behind us, goes to the priest, says, tell me who did it. So none of these people did it. And then he's like, well, then you're going to need to choose. I'm going to kill 10 people because we got to send a message.
Well, he starts with a lower number.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it says, he wants, name somebody, basically. Somebody that I can, you've heard confessions. Who's the biggest a-hole here? I'll kill him. And Marin refuses, so he's like, okay, I'm going to kill 10 people. And Marin continues to refuse, and then when he starts killing people, is like, and then he starts naming people. He starts naming people because he's been told, if you don't choose 10, I kill all of these people. And there's probably around several score of people there, 70 or so people there in the square. And it precipitates an understandable faith crisis. He's like, I can't be a priest, especially not here. And so he takes a sabbatical, and in a very short order, because this film is set in 1947, he's already served on 6 expeditions. Apparently he had some archaeological interests before becoming a parish priest, so he's able to get into that field very quickly.
Well, and it does say that he's on sabbatical, but it also references that his status in the Vatican is...
It's up for review in the near future.
Well, and basically the only thing preventing the review is the fact that he's on this...
Oh, yes.
It's implied that it's not a voluntary sabbatical. He's on sabbatical, but...
My impression is that he chose this because of that experience that he had, but he's been keeping himself so isolated in Africa that the church hasn't been able to bring him in for some final meetings.
Yeah.
And so they have that younger priest makes mention of this.
Father Francis, played by Gabriel Mann, who has studied Father Marin's previous writings and is a big fan of Father Marin, has studied some of his archaeological excavations, things of that nature, and has gotten himself, kind of wormed his way into being assigned to work with Marin on this one.
So Marin is in British East Africa, He's brought in for quite the find. It turns out to be a Byzantine-style 5th century cathedral, far further south than it should have been for this time period. It is buried underground. As they are digging it out, they notice that the way the stone and everything is set, it's pristine, which indicates that this structure was buried almost immediately after it was completed, which is weird and which is a sign of bad things to come. And so they do dig it up. They go inside. It's pretty pristine inside. But then they find quickly that this cathedral, which is dedicated to St. Michael the Archangel from the Bible, is built on top of a pagan ceremonial ground at which human sacrifices occurred. And so Marin says that the idea was to take this evil place and cap it. They put the church over that to keep it down. And there's these huge statues of angels with spears pointing down, and then bury the thing as a way to kind of seal the evil down there. But of course that evil gets out as they start to dig it up and ends up causing all sorts of problems.
We have a character named Rachel Lesno, played by Clara Beller, who is the doctor in the
lady
village.
doctor. Mm-hmm.
And she has a certain admiration for Father Marin that is developed very quickly. Mm-hmm. She gets along fine with Father Francis. They kind of work together in the clinic. And there's this guy that's kind of hanging around their excavation named Chichi. Mm-hmm. And he is disfigured. Seems to have, I'm not sure whether it's like cerebral palsy or something like that. They bring him into the clinic because he has a number of infected wounds, because he just lives on the outskirts of these societies, and he starts to heal fairly miraculously. They bring in a surgeon to fix a improperly healed broken leg, which has to be rebroken in surgery. And as you mentioned, this doctor is perhaps
one of the luckiest characters in any Exorcist movie. It's one of the things I remember from the first time I saw it, and I pointed it out to you as appropriate in this film. This guy is so lucky. So he's a very skilled surgeon. He's from Nairobi. They fly him in to help the guy with the surgery, and then he's going to fly out. And Marin's like, "Why don't you stay and look at the big chapel we dug up?" And he's like, "What's going on here?" It's like he's picking up on the weird vibes. And he's like, "Nah, I think I'll be leaving. Good luck." And he gets on the plane, and he flies away, and we never see him again. And it's this wonderful exception to the characters that are brought in to die. This is the character that's brought in. He does his job, he leaves. He basically says, "Something's up, man, and I don't want anything to do with it."
But as he's flying out, we get a great aerial view of that chapel. Yeah.
So I love that he's in there, because he doesn't really need to be there. But it's almost like a little Easter egg. It's like it's the opposite of what you expect. The Black Doctor comes in and he's not killed. He leaves before any of the traumatic stuff happens.
Yeah. We also have some Father Francis. As soon as they get to a certain point in their excavation, he's kind of freaked out by things, and he says that they don't have enough resources to manage the relationship with the locals. So he insists on calling in the British Army, and we see a Sergeant Major played by Ralph Brown, and then there's also Major Granville played by Julian Wadham, who are the leaders of this unit that are brought in. And Major Granville is, at first he seems okay, a little heavy-handed, and then he starts going down like the same course and path as like the German commander that caused Father Marin's faith crisis. And he, at one point, makes a very crucial error and kills an innocent. He is, in essence, relieved of command by the Sergeant Major. He hasn't actually formally been relieved of command, but he's basically been relieved of command, and so he knows what's coming, what would happen to him when all the paperwork's filed, and that he's just done something bad, and he's having his own faith crisis, and commit suicide is his only way out.
Were you surprised by that?
A little bit.
The suddenness of it.
It was telegraphed. I saw it coming. Yeah. His little speech is what caught me off guard.
Yeah.
It
was tell Father Marin that I know what he's been experiencing now, and there's only one way out.
Yep.
And then he shoots himself, and he was an interesting character. You're right. He arcs pretty quick. He starts getting more and more extreme. The sergeant major at one point, I forget what he said, but he's like, "Sir," it's like it's like, "Are you serious about these things you're telling me to do?" But they obviously have been fairly close. They do establish that, and so the sergeant major is quite upset about the death, and what follows that is a local, because there's a kind of a compound, and there's a few Christians, but most of them are
in the hotel.
In the hotel, the best one around, because it's the only one around. But most of the natives kind of live outside of the compound. They appear to be some kind of pagan. They don't really want a lot to do with the British or with the Christians. And one of them, after the major kills that innocent woman, has come to the conclusion, and I guess he's not alone in coming to the conclusion that the Christians have introduced an evil spirit, but he decides I'm going to be proactive about it, and he goes into the school that Father Francis has started. It's only now, like the day that locals finally come. He's just been teaching the two Christians. And after the death, the previous night, a lot of locals were like, well, you should go there because the Christians won't kill you if you're in their church. Technically right. It's one of their own that comes in and commits the massacre at the church, including killing one of the two Christian boys. And obviously it affects Father Francis very much.
Who's also attacked and injured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he finds solace in
Chi-Chi,
yeah. And what appears to be his miraculous healing, that he just keeps looking better and better at a remarkably quick rate.
Well, and at one point he tries to offer like some sort of prayer of gratitude and takes his cross and touches it to Chi-Chi's forehead, and that's when they realize Chi-Chi is not what he appears to be, and this is not a miraculous healing. And that rather Chi-Chi is possessed by a demon, and it's the demon who's actually doing everything.
Yeah. And so he asked Chi-Chi, through the doctor's able to interpret, do you want to become a Christian like me and Father Marin? So, yeah, absolutely I want to. I want to do it in the church.
Yeah.
And the moment he says that, oh, because obviously he's possessed. And Chi-Chi himself seems to be sincere. Chi-Chi genuinely wants to be like these people that have helped him. But the demon inside him wants to trick them into the church because there's unholy ground underneath that holy ground, and just mess with the brains and souls of as many people as he can, but particularly the Christian characters.
Well, the doctor and Father Marin in particular. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He doesn't seem to want to really mess with Father Francis. He just wants to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Because Father Francis he seems very committed to baptizing Chi-Chi, but doesn't seem to also understand the implications of this demon possession. And so, yeah, Father Francis is... Actually, we never see what happens to... Oh, yeah, we did. Yeah, they found him. For a second, I was like, we never saw what happened to him. He ends up fleeing the church at one point because of what he's seen inside from Chi-Chi.
He wants to go back to the compound to get his holy books to be able to do the exorcism.
Yeah, Book of Common...
No, there's some kind of ritual,
rites.
Something... Yeah. And...
Which has the exorcism procedure in it, is why he wants it.
Yeah. But he gets killed.
No, he's not killed. Remember, he's hung in the tree. Yeah,
he's hung in the tree, but he eventually dies of his injuries. Before that, he tells Father Marin, look, he's possessed. Chi-Chi's possessed. You need to help him.
Well, first he wants last rites.
Yeah.
He convinces Father Marin that he needs last rites. And then, as soon as Father Marin agrees to give him last rites, he's like, but you need to go do this other thing. And Father Marin's like, well, but I know how to do last rites. And he's like, no, you don't need it for that. You need it for the exorcism. Yeah. And he ends up passing away right then. And Father Marin then goes back to his room and pulls out his robes and has this moment of decision.
Yeah, and he spent a little time because after the Father Francis flees, there's an earthquake, and some stones come up in front of the door to the chapel, keeping Chi-Chi and the lady doctor trapped inside. He goes back the next day. They're able to part them enough that he gets in.
No, the demon parts them.
Parts them. And he has a conversation with the demon in Chi-Chi's body, and he leaves, and that's when he comes back to the compound, and eventually he gets his vestments and stuff, and having confronted, he knows that this is a demon. Like he knows, and he prays to God, give me the strength to do this because I have to do this. Like, I have my issues, but those don't matter now. Like, I got to get rid of this demon.
He also, throughout the movie, is not mincing or trying to use faith to cover up things. At one point, somebody asked him, is this what...
That's the Christian hotel keeper after one of his sons is killed. And he says, is this how the Christian God treats those who keep faith with him? And Father Marin simply says, yes.
Yeah.
Which is accurate.
Yeah.
Which is not a great selling point in some respects for Christianity, but is true to it.
Yes. Yeah, so then Father Marin decides he's going to do this. He puts on his vestments, as you said, and heads back. And Rachel has been being tortured by the demon. Rachel, we learn, is a survivor of the...
She's Polish. She was in a concentration camp.
Yeah, she's a survivor of a concentration camp, but she was at one where people were being vested of their belongings and apparently didn't do much of anything to help anyone.
Yeah.
And so she has survivor's guilt,
yeah.
Which is why she has ended up in this area of the world trying to help others and alleviate some of her own guilt and things of that nature. And this demon is just torturing her with this and basically sent her back to relive these things. Yeah. And it's... So she's quite distressed when Father Marin comes in and she's able to flee. In fact, she goes back to the clinic and, jumping ahead slightly at the time of the exorcism, is about to commit suicide herself. Yeah. But Father Marin begins the exorcism procedure, or the procedure is the wrong word. Do you call it a rite or?
Yeah, it'll be a rite.
Yeah.
A ritual.
Or ritual, yeah.
And Father Marin has that confrontation where he performs the exorcism. There's the Aurora Borealis going on outside. The tribe's getting antsy. The British are getting paranoid. And it's just building to some kind of confrontation. And I think it's effective. I think the way everything has been built up, it's like, how do you end this? Yeah. Especially given how long the exorcism takes in The Exorcist. And this is supposed to be something on like if I had one major criticism about this film as backstory, is the event almost seems too big compared to
what happens
in The Exorcist. So like if I were to create a backstory from that, it'd be, there'd be something about the first time he encounters, but it'd be like he just keeps fighting this fight over and over again with exorcisms over the years. But that's it. He just keeps fighting this fight. But this is so big that it's not ideal. Again, I think this is truer to the spirit.
It's so big you almost would have expected that the demon doesn't just simply flee.
Yeah. But he does succeed in performing that exorcism, getting the demon out of Chi-Chi. And then we have our standard wrap-up sequences where he talks to the lady doctor. Yeah, we'll keep writing. I have to go to Rome and report this, and they'll figure out something to do with me. And then it ends, and this is such a wonderful thing for Schrader to do, is that homage to The Searchers, where you see Father Marin through the doorway as he goes out, like in the classic 1956 Western. And both characters have found what they are searching for, but they know that what it is means that they can't be part of this group that they've invested so much time and effort and love in helping, that they have to go on to their next mission. And I think it's effective.
So the first Exorcist movie, we talked about how you kind of get from it what you brought into it. So if you came into it with a perspective of faith, you could come out of it with a perspective of faith, right? Mm. Do you feel this movie does the same thing? And if so, as well as or worse than The Exorcist?
Not as well as The Exorcist.
Do you think it does that, though, in the same, like, a similar thing?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah?
I think it does. And I think that's why it stands out compared to the others, because I don't think any of the others come close to doing what The Exorcist did in that way. Okay. This comes the closest.
So what did you bring into this?
I bring into this what I brought into the last one, which is a general skepticism.
Yeah.
But an interest like there's within the world of the film, I'm comfortable with the way things are depicted and with the consistency and the ideas in between these two films.
Well, the reason I asked that is because it seems as though these movies resonated with you.
Yeah.
So I was just curious what you brought into it that you're taking away from it that made them resonate with you.
I don't know. I think the idea of redemption is universal. There's these ideas of
well, and that certainly runs through some of the other movies you've shown me, like Atonement and
yeah. And just these ideas of faith and good versus evil and overcoming demons, literal or figurative. Both this and The Exorcist they're about exorcisms, but they're also the redemption stories of priests that are involved in the exorcism. So there's a lot of ways thematically, that this lines up. It lines up really well with The Exorcist. It's a very appropriate companion piece.
It is a little bit derivative, but it's not
different enough.
So.
No, yeah. It spreads its wings as much as it can while keeping just enough ties to the film that it doesn't feel like it's just out in left field.
Yeah.
These feel like part of the same universe.
I
largely.
agree. Yeah. How would you rate this film? I was slightly surprised to see that this has an aggregate rating on IMDb of just 5.2 stars.
Oh yeah, and it's got a horrible Rotten Tomatoes of 20-something%.
Really?
Yeah.
It has a Metacritic score of 55, which doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
The exact figure is 29% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm a sucker for Schrader. I love his themes, and I resonate with his reflectiveness, and it's a Paul Schrader movie as much as it is an Exorcist movie, and that's what works.
Yeah. So how would you rate it?
I'm gonna give it 3 stars.
Okay.
It really works well. It's got a few moments that stand out, but it's not an exceptional movie. But it's a good self-contained companion piece to the original Exorcist. I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 because it does try to do different things. And what horrified Warner Brothers about this is it was not a mid-aughts horror movie. It was too smart.
Yeah.
So they cut it up, they butchered it, they created a much stupider version that brought in a more conventionally attractive... the female lead in this she's pretty.
Yeah.
But they brought in a Bond girl. Not Famke Janssen, the other one from GoldenEye, to be the lady doctor. And then they just have a lot more over-the-top supernatural action things that the natives versus the military, which you found kind of annoying. There's much more of that in the Exorcist, the beginning. So I really like that this did something different as a horror movie, but stayed true to the original Exorcist.
Yeah. Our ratings are actually pretty close on this one, though I'm a little bit lower than you. I like Paul Schrader. Anything he does, I think it's fair to give it a shot. Absolutely. But of the Paul Schraders I've seen so far, this might be my least favorite, and I'm going to rate it 3 and 7.
Okay, yeah.
So just slightly lower than
I
you.
was literally, as we were watching this, I'm like, I'd probably give it a 7.5.
Yeah.
But, it's closer to an 8 than a 7 for me.
Yeah. This had a estimated budget of $30 million. Do you know how it did?
This movie made almost no money because it had such a limited theatrical release, at least at the box office. Less $500,000, something like that.
What I'm seeing on IMDb doesn't look like it could possibly be accurate. It's saying it's $250,000.
Okay. It wasn't a wide release. It was released in some cities and then on video.
Yeah. I'm going to jump into some trivia if you're ready.
Yes.
From IMDb. It says Paul Schrader was given no money for publicity or music production after Morgan Creek decided to release his version. He was only given $35,000 for visual effects and post-production, which explains the shoddy computer graphics and inconsistent audio quality.
What do you think of those hyenas?
They were...
That actually worked for me, the fact that they seemed a little unreal.
It worked at first, and then when they have the cows eating the hyenas, it lost me on that aspect of it.
That's a weird scene.
Yeah.
That feels like that should have played bigger than it did, because it was so weird, but it's there and gone.
Yeah. Additionally, Morgan Creek chose the release date of May 20th, the weekend Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith came out. On the day of audition, Gabriel Mann went to meet the director Paul Schrader dressed as a priest and carrying a DVD copy of The Exorcist from 1973. He immediately got the role. Stellan Skarsgård is playing a younger version of Max von Sydow's character from The Exorcist. Skarsgård is nearly a decade older than von Sydow was during the filming of the original movie.
Though, of course, von Sydow was made up to seem much older. And, of course, Skarsgård gets to play another scientist later on in the Marvel movies. So this temple, this church in Africa, he wouldn't have a bigger finding until the Tesseract in the 21st century.
Yep. Alternate castings.
Oh, okay.
For Father Merrin.
I feel like I should know this.
Liam Neeson.
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah, I'm glad they went with Skarsgård.
Yeah. Apparently they're talking about doing a Naked Gun reboot with Liam Neeson.
Really?
And the only reason they're doing that is because Liam Neeson delivers silly dialogue in his serious voice. Seth MacFarlane fans think that's hilarious.
Okay. Mary Beth Hurd, Paul Schrader's wife, does the uncredited voice of Chi-Chi.
Ah.
The war-torn Dutch village was actually a reworked set from the Gangs of New York. Like the Martin Scorsese epic, this was also shot at Rome's Cinecittà Studios.
There's a great story that Martin Scorsese tells about being in Italy and shooting the Gangs of New York and being at parties and stuff. Oh, Martin, what are you doing? I'm filming a movie. Oh, what are you filming? The Gangs of New York. And then they would give him this look like, why are you filming it in Italy? Because it's not contemporary New York. It was easier to build old-time New York here.
Yeah. According to the second Exorcist movie, Merrin's first encounter with Pazuzu, which is the name of the demon, was in 1935, according to the second Exorcist movie.
And there is another Exorcist movie that's going to come out next year for the 50th anniversary.
Oh, really?
Untitled, but Ellen Burstyn from the original film will be back.
I wanted to read one crazy credit in particular.
Okay.
Apparently we cut off this movie, the credits of this movie, too soon.
Oh, okay.
Crazy credit at the extreme end of the end credits. After the last production company logo has faded out and the screen is entirely black, a demon voice grumbles, "I am perfection."
Pazuzu, the demon is your enemy now and will pursue you.
Some quotes from this movie.
Okay.
That stood out to me at the time. The most effective one, I think, or one of the most effective ones, is Rachel, when someone's talking to her about why she does what she does and faith, and she says, "Sometimes I think the best view of God is from hell."
Yeah, that's a good one.
The German commander is Obersturmführer Ralph Kessel from the SS. They find one of his men in a ditch with a knife in his back. They say that he was murdered by someone in the village, and he then goes to Father Merrin and says, well, that's before he goes to Father Merrin, but he tells the village, "So who is responsible for this?"
You see the German army retreating, and it makes you feel hope. It should not. Who is responsible for this?
Yeah. And he tells Father Merrin, "We all must make our little deals with the devil, Merrin." He's kind of an interesting character for how little he's in the movie. So, any other closing thoughts on this movie, Nate?
No. Again, I think it's solid. I think it's a good companion piece. Skip the other Exorcist movies. Maybe watch 3. There's some good stuff in 3, but it cannot be forgiven.
Not surprisingly, this movie is rated R. We found it on YouTube Movies. You can rent it on other platforms. Who would you recommend this movie to?
If you like The Exorcist, or if you like more serious horror movies.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you like The Exorcist or are open to those movies that can go either way in challenging or upholding a faith, this is a good one.
Or even if you're more of an art movie guy.
Yeah.
And this is an art movie that has that Venn diagram overlap between horror movies and serious examinations of faith issues.
Yeah. But if you haven't seen a Paul Schrader previously, don't make this your first Paul Schrader.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. How do I want to phrase that? I'm inserting a potential editing break. I have a question for you,
Oh, okay.
which may completely get deleted. That's entirely at your discretion.
Okay.
So here's why this conversation might get deleted.
Okay. What did I bring into this? Yeah.
You got some sort of advertisement from British East Africa.
It's the finest hotel around.
I wish we'd seen the name of that hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were those white stones in that village?
I'm not sure.
Like, because they almost appeared like they could have been headstones, but the only headstone we actually see is
I think that might just be
Father
landscaping.
Francis's. Yeah. Well, they're clearly aligned around that flagpole for some purpose, but I couldn't figure out what. So, one of her audiobooks. So Leah Satilli has done basically nothing but extremism.
Okay.
Podcasts, books, things of that nature. I think I've talked to you about at least one of her podcasts called Bundyville.
Okay, I think so.
She wrote a book about Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow.
Already.
Yeah. But her book focused on like some of the ideology type things that allowed them to go down that course. Mm-hmm. That's like what she really specializes on.
So the fundamentalist thinking, the extremist thinking.
Extremist for sure. So she's mostly done right-wing extremists, hence like Bundyville. I'm trying to remember one of the other ones she did. Her current one, and I meant to text you about this earlier today. What are your thoughts on the ELF?
ELF.
The Earth Liberation Front.
Okay.
Do you remember that in the 90s?
Maybe vaguely.
They were notable, at least here in Utah, for setting fire to cars at like car dealerships, like especially SUVs. So and their biggest thing was setting a large wildfire in Colorado that cost something like $10 million to fight. They were dubbed terrorists, eco-terrorists, and two of their leaders were on the FBI 10 Most Wanted list until one of them surrendered in 2020.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And is still waiting to go to trial. And his attorney is so confident in their case, he's allowing him to be interviewed for a podcast.
Wow.
Before he goes to trial. To admit everything that he's done.
Okay. Okay.
Like their premise was, the LF premise was, what do you do when you've been sounding the alarm and protesting and all these things for so long and no one listens? Like, no one's, you've been sounding the alarm and nobody's responding. Like, you then at some point must escalate, right? That's their theory, so.
Yeah, I don't know if the jury's going to go for that.
Well, one of the things that's come up related to this podcast, and I've only listened to the first episode so far, is the FBI has a history with right-wing extremists and, things of that nature, prosecuting the crimes. And with left-wing extremism, they prosecute the ideology.
Okay.
Timothy McVeigh, the Bundys, whatever group the Bundys were associated with that took over that wildlife refuge center, none of those were ever deemed terrorists. Name the last right-wing extremism group that was deemed a terrorist. And yet the LF, who committed no
murders,
there was no loss of life, only property crimes, is a terrorist organization.
Sounds like the legacy of Hoover, kind of in the marrow of the institution.
Yeah. So I'm curious to see where this podcast goes. Like Leah Satilli is one that if she does something, I'll go follow it.
You'll follow extremists.
Well, she just does a great job of laying it out. And she has a way of getting people to open up to her and get information that a lot of other people can't get. She went to the Bundys' homes and sat down with the Bundys and got them to talk openly about their stuff. So,
I was trying to think of some joke to end it on. The Bundy patriarch was upstairs during the meeting and he flushed his toilet. So, a Married with Children joke.
Okay.
Which is a holdover from All in the Family jokes.
Uh-huh.
You didn't leave me with much.
No, I'm genuinely interested in this podcast. I've had two that I started recently that I think very likely will end up on my top podcast of the year list. This one and that Outlaw Ocean I was texting you about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Digression over.